You've seen the movies: Cowboys, Six Shooters, Red Dust, Sunset, Clean, Beautiful. The good guys win, then ride off into the fading light. But that's not how history actually worked. In real history, the good guys sometimes had to do the most painful things they'd ever do in their lives. The villains sometimes walked free and died rich. And the most astonishing, reckless, genuinely extraordinary characters the West ever produced, most of them never made it into a single film. These are their stories. 1. You've heard the name Bass Reeves, the man who captured more than 3,000 wanted criminals, never once accepted a bribe, never took a single bullet, not even a graze across 32 years of active duty as a federal deputy U.S. Marshal. But there's a part of his story that almost nobody talks about. The year was 1902. Bass Reeves was 64 years old. He'd given 32 years of his life to the law, longer than most men even stayed alive out west. He'd ridden across Indian Territory more times than he could count, through blizzards and flash floods and ambushes, always coming back with his man. Then one morning, a new arrest warrant landed on his desk. He looked at the name, Benjamin Reeves. His son. Benny had shot and killed his wife after he found out she'd been unfaithful. According to witnesses, he showed no remorse, not a single word of regret. At 64 years old, after 32 years, Bass Reeves could have handed the warrant off to someone else without a second thought. Nobody would have blamed him, not one person. Instead, he rode out and tracked down his own son. When he found Benny, the old man looked him in the eye and said, "As of right now, you are no longer my son. You committed a crime. I have a warrant for your arrest, dead or alive. And today I'm taking you in, one way or the other." Benjamin Reeves was convicted and sentenced to life in prison at the United States Penitentiary in Leavenworth, Kansas. Father and son never really spoke again. Bass Reeves died in January 1910, before he ever saw his son walk free. And there's one more detail about this man, something most people still don't know. Bass Reeves could not read. He could not write. Not a single word, not his entire life. More than 3,000 arrest warrants, every single one of them read aloud to him by someone else. He memorized every detail, every name, every description, every location. He never missed anything. That wasn't a superpower. That was a man born into slavery in Crawford County, Arkansas, who was given no options and turned that limitation into something nobody else could match. He was born enslaved. He escaped during the Civil War, lived among the Cherokee, Seminole, and Creek nations in Indian Territory, and learned their languages fluently. When the federal government needed a lawman who could operate across those lands no white deputy could navigate alone, Bass Reeves was the only man for the job. He was appointed as one of the first black deputy U.S. marshals west of the Mississippi River in 1875 under Judge Isaac C. Parker, the famous hanging judge of Fort Smith, Arkansas. Many historians today believe Bass Reeves was the real-life inspiration behind the Lone Ranger. He fits the description on almost every point. But you'll have to decide that for yourself. 2. The 30th of May, 1899. The stagecoach route between Globe and Florence, Arizona Territory. A masked figure stepped out from behind a boulder and leveled a .38 caliber revolver at the driver. That figure was a woman, and what she pulled off that afternoon would go down as the very last stagecoach robbery in American history. Her name was Pearl Hart, born Martha Jane Lovejoy in Lindsay, Ontario, Canada, around 1871. she didn't grow up wild. She came from a respectable middle-class family. She got a proper education. She had prospects. Then she made the mistake of marrying a man named Hart, a gambler, an alcoholic, and a man who hit her. They separated and reconciled multiple times over the years. She had 2 children, both of whom she eventually sent to live with her mother back in the Midwest because she had nothing to give them. By 1899, Pearl Hart was 28 years old and flat broke in the Arizona Territory, working as a cook at a mining camp near Globe. Then she got word that her mother was gravely ill and needed money for a doctor. She had exactly one asset, a .38 caliber revolver. Pearl cut her hair short, put on men's clothing, and recruited a drink. On May 30th, the 2 of them stepped in front of the Globe to Florence stage, guns drawn. They took $431 and 2 firearms from the passengers. Then Pearl did something nobody expected. She handed each passenger $1 back so they'd have enough to buy a meal when they reached town. 3 days later, both of them were found, passed out in the desert, exhausted, out of food and water, completely lost. A Pinal County Sheriff's posse picked them up without a fight. And here's where the story gets genuinely strange. At her trial in Florence, Arizona, the all-male jury acquitted Pearl Hart despite the fact that she had openly confessed to the robbery in front of everyone in the courtroom multiple times. The judge was furious. He ordered her rearrested on the spot. This time, she was charged with stealing the stagecoach driver's revolver, found guilty, sentenced to 5 years at the Territorial Prison in Yuma, Arizona. Yuma Territorial Prison had no facilities for women. Pearl Hart became the only female inmate in the place. Newspaper reporters from across the country descended on Yuma to interview her. Cosmopolitan magazine ran a feature on her, calling her image a complete contradiction of everything people expected a stagecoach robber to look like. She was granted a pardon in 1902, after 3 years under circumstances that were never fully explained. And then Pearl Hart disappeared. Nobody knows exactly when or where she died. Nobody knows what she did for the rest of her life. The last curtain of the stagecoach era was pulled down by a woman, and then she simply vanished into history. 3. The 3rd of October, 1900. Browns Park, Colorado. Isom Dart stepped out of his log cabin into the morning air. He never saw it coming. From behind a boulder roughly 400 feet away, a single rifle shot punched through his chest. His last words, according to the people who found him, were, "Oh Lord." Isom Dart was not an outlaw. The neighbors who knew him described him as the finest horseman in the whole Browns Park region. Gifted, generous, and completely trustworthy. He'd been born into slavery in Maybell, Texas, sometime around 1849. After the Civil War ended and emancipation came, he'd slowly made his way north and west, eventually filing claim on a piece of land in Colorado that he built into a working ranch over years of grueling labor. The cattle barons wanted that land. The big Wyoming and Colorado ranchers, wealthy men who already controlled hundreds of thousands of acres, were systematically running small ranchers and independent homesteaders out of the region. When harassment and legal pressure failed, they turned to a man named Tom Horn. Tom Horn was a former U.S. Army scout, a former Pinkerton detective, and a professional assassin. His reported fee, $500 per confirmed kill, roughly the equivalent of $17,000 in today's money. When word spread about what had happened to Isom Dart, the county coroner's inquest filed a single-sentence report. Deceased met his death by a gunshot wound inflicted by an unknown party. Tom Horn was never investigated, never charged, and never tried for the death of Isom Dart. He was finally hanged in Cheyenne, Wyoming, on the 20th of November, 1903, but for a different killing entirely. The murder of one 4-year-old Willie Nickel, a sheep herder's son, whom Horn apparently shot by mistake while targeting the boy's father. Isom Dart was buried in a lonely grave in Maybell, Colorado. No headstone, no marker on any official map, almost no mention in any history book. This wasn't the Wild West. This was the American West with a system that decided who got to live and who had to die based on the color of their skin and the value of the soil under their feet. 4. Roy Bean had never spent a single day in law school. He'd been a small-time criminal, a saloon keeper, and a man who had, on at least one documented occasion, been hanged but survived because the rope stretched. In the early 1880s, the Southern Pacific Railroad drove its tracks through the remote Pecos River country of southwest Texas. Thousands of rough construction workers poured into the region, and with them came gamblers, thieves, and killers. The nearest legitimate courthouse was over 200 miles away. Roy Bean saw his opportunity. He ran for justice of the peace, was appointed by the Texas Rangers, and set himself up as, in his own words, the law west of the Pecos. His courtroom was a saloon called the Jersey Lily, named after British actress Lily Langtry, whom Bean admired with an almost religious devotion despite never once meeting her in person. His gavel was a Smith & Wesson Model 3 revolver. His entire library of law books consisted of exactly one volume, the 1,879 Revised Statutes of Texas. When other legal volumes were sent to him, he used them for firewood, but it's a specific case that sealed his place in American folklore. A man's body was brought before him, a laborer who had fallen from the Southern Pacific Railroad bridge and died on impact. When Bean patted down the body, he found two things in the dead man's pockets: a Colt revolver and $40 in cash. Bean reviewed the situation carefully. Then he declared, "This court finds the deceased guilty of carrying a concealed weapon. Fined $40. He reached into the dead man's pocket, removed the $40, tucked it into his own vest, and announced the session was over. Over more than 2 decades on the bench, Roy Bean pocketed virtually all of the fines he collected. He presided over cases while actively pouring whiskey for the jury. He once dismissed all charges against a railroad worker who had pistol-whipped a Chinese laborer, ruling that based on his reading of the 1,879 statutes, Texas law technically said nothing about the killing of a Chinaman, and therefore the court had no jurisdiction. He held horse races during court recesses and bet on them himself. He charged court fees for acquittals as well as convictions, reasoning that he'd spent time on the case either way. And yet, and this is the part that's genuinely difficult to explain, in one of the most violent, lawless stretches of territory in 19th century America, Roy Bean actually kept order. Not elegant order, not just order, but real, functional order in a place that had absolutely nothing else. Roy Bean died on the 16th of March, 1903, in his saloon, a day after a monumental bender. He was found in his cot the next morning. To the end, he remained completely and perfectly himself. 5. Some legends are built by other people. Calamity Jane built her own legend and then lived inside it until the day she died. She claimed she'd served as an Army scout under General George Crook during the Great Sioux War of 1876. She claimed she was a crack sharpshooter. She claimed she'd had a long, passionate love affair with Wild Bill Hickok. The historical record is considerably more complicated. Her real name was Martha Jane Canary. Born around 1852, likely in Princeton, Missouri. Her parents died before she was 13, leaving her to fend for herself and look after her younger siblings in a mining camp in Montana Territory. She arrived in the West not in glory, but out of pure desperation because there was simply nowhere else to go. She worked as a cook, a laundress, a dance hall girl, and an ox team driver at various points in her life. The Army did employ her in a limited capacity during some expeditions, but not in any official military role. But Jane had one gift that very few people in the 19th century West possessed. She knew how to tell a story about herself. She hired ghostwriters to produce her memoir, Life and Adventures of Calamity Jane, by herself, which was sold at Wild West shows and dime museums across the country. She performed in Buffalo Bill Cody's orbit for a time, though even that relationship was complicated. Every time she told the story of her life, it got a little bigger, a little more dramatic, a little more impossible. Most of what she said was either exaggerated beyond recognition or invented outright. But here's the thing about Calamity Jane, that almost nobody knows the part she never included in any performance, any interview, or any memoir. In the summer of 1878, a smallpox epidemic tore through the town of Deadwood, Dakota Territory. People fled. Healthy residents cleared out as fast as they could. The sick were left behind in cabins and tents, without food, without water, without anyone to look after them. Calamity Jane stayed. For weeks, she moved between the sick and the dying, cleaning, feeding, sitting with people through the night. Nobody asked her to do it. Nobody paid her. There was no audience, no reporter, no show promoter watching from the sidelines. She just stayed. Deadwood residents who survived would later say she saved lives during that epidemic. But Jane herself never mentioned it. It didn't make it into the memoir. It didn't make it into the stage act. When she died in August, 1903 inches, Terry, South Dakota, she left instructions that she wanted to be buried next to Wild Bill Hickok in Deadwood's Mount Moriah Cemetery. Most historians agree there was no romantic relationship between the two of them. They spent maybe a few weeks in the same town at the same time before Hickok was shot dead at a poker table in August 1876. But that was the story she chose to tell, and nobody then or now has the right to take it away from her. 6. Hollywood has always painted women in the Old West as figures in need of rescue. But there's a truth that almost never gets told in any Western movie. For a lot of women in 19th century America, the West wasn't a place they were dragged to against their will. It was a place they deliberately chose to go because where they came from was worse. In the eastern states during the 19th century, a married woman had almost no legal identity. When a woman married, her property legally became her husband's property. She could not sign a contract without her husband's co-signature. She could not open a bank account independently. If the marriage dissolved, she almost always lost custody of her children, regardless of the circumstances. The West was different. Wyoming Territory became the first place in the entire United States to grant women the right to vote in December 1869, a full 51 years before the 19th Amendment made it federal law. The reason had almost nothing to do with progressive ideals. The territorial legislature was trying desperately to attract women to settle in a region that was overwhelmingly male. Granting voting rights was the most compelling offer they had. Colorado followed in 1893, when it became the first state to grant women suffrage by popular vote of the male electorate. Utah and Idaho followed closely behind. In many Western territories, women could file homestead claims under the Homestead Act of 1,862 inches, their own names. Women could own and operate businesses. Women served as postmasters, hotel managers, and physicians in frontier communities decades before those roles were common anywhere in the East. Thousands of women traveled west alone, not trailing behind husbands, but making independent decisions to start over, with a new name if they wanted one, with a new history, with a new life on land that belonged to nobody yet. The West was not paradise. It was brutal, lonely, and frequently deadly. But for a woman who had nothing left to lose, brutal and free was a better deal than comfortable and owned. 7. Spring 1892, Johnson County, Wyoming. This is not a story about two gunfighters facing off in a dusty street at high noon. This is a story about money and what men with enough of it could get away with in 19th century America. The Wyoming Stock Growers Association was one of the most powerful organizations in the entire American West. Its members were cattle barons, millionaires who controlled ranches covering hundreds of thousands of acres across northern Wyoming. Men like wealthy Massachusetts-born landowner Hubert Teschemacher and English investor Morton Fruin, who had bankrolled much of the Powder River cattle operations during the boom years of the 1880s. After the catastrophic winter of 1886-1887, the Big Die-Up, when blizzards killed as much as 90% of the open-range cattle herds across Wyoming and Montana, the cattle barons' grip on the land began to slip. Small ranchers and independent homesteaders started moving into the region, filing claims under the Homestead Act and running their own livestock. The cattle barons accused them of rustling. Some were probably guilty, most were not. Instead of pursuing legal remedies through the courts, the Wyoming Stock Growers Association did something that's remarkable in its brazenness, even by the standards of the Gilded Age. They recruited 22 hired gunmen from Texas, professional killers, and assembled a hit list of 70 people in Johnson County who were to be killed. They chartered a private train with the cooperation of the Union Pacific Railroad and under the protection of Wyoming's Republican governor, Amos Barber, to transport the invaders north into Johnson County under cover of darkness. All telegraph lines into the county were cut in advance, so news couldn't leak out. The invasion force killed 2 men at a ranch called the KC before the local community realized what was happening. Word spread fast. Johnson County Sheriff Red Angus deputized over 200 men and surrounded the invaders at a ranch called the TA, pinning them down. With the cattle barons and their hired killers about to be overrun, Governor Barber personally telegraphed President Benjamin Harrison in Washington, D.C., requesting federal military intervention. Harrison ordered the 6th Cavalry from Fort McKinney to ride in and rescue the invaders. The U.S. Army essentially saved the cattle barons from facing justice for a planned mass murder. At trial in Cheyenne, charges against all of the defendants were eventually dropped when Johnson County ran out of money to continue prosecution. Not a single cattle baron was convicted. Not one hired gunman served prison time. The Johnson County War barely appears in standard American history textbooks. but it answers a question more important than anything Hollywood ever put on screen about the Old West. Who actually controlled this country, and what were they willing to do to keep it that way? The version of the Wild West that Hollywood sold you is beautiful, but it's missing these people. Bass Reeves, a man born into slavery who became the most effective federal lawman the West had ever seen, who arrested his own son, and who died before he ever saw the boy walk free again. Pearl Hart, who robbed a stagecoach to save her dying mother, handed each victim $1 back for their supper, got acquitted by a jury that couldn't bring itself to convict her, got rearrested in the courtroom, and then simply disappeared from the pages of history. Isom Dart, who built a life and a ranch from nothing on free land in Colorado, was shot in the back from 400 feet away, and whose killer was never charged for his murder. Roy Bean, who had no legal training, no qualifications, and no legitimate authority, but somehow kept order across one of the most dangerous stretches of land in the entire American Southwest for over 2 decades. Calamity Jane, who invented a legend about herself and performed it every day of her adult life, but whose single most remarkable act was one she never talked about, never performed, and never put in a memoir. The women who didn't get dragged west but ran toward it because the East had nothing left to offer them. And the ranchers and farmers of Johnson County, Wyoming, who discovered that in America in 1892, a rich man with the right political connections could hire 22 killers, get saved by the United States Army, and face 0 legal consequences. That is the real American West. Messy, unjust, frequently brutal, occasionally magnificent, and truer than anything that ever rode off into the sunset.